Welcome to another episode of The Local Dive. This is Alex Scott, joined by everyone. Dean, Top, and Sarah. Ashlyn Portero.
Hello. Oh man, I just already messed. I already opened my drink.
And the producer, Goldchain Baldry. What's up?
Let's go.
How's
Good
everybody?
to be back post pneumonia.
Yeah.
That was pretty rough.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're alive. That's all that matters.
It's been several weeks.
And it wasn't COVID.
It was not COVID. It was like old school pneumonia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get your AARP card next week?
Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I missed like half the world. Like right when school started and football started and down for the count. I even preached a sermon from a chair.
You did. Trendy.
Yeah,
Very
I
trendy.
was feeling it.
We're actually going to talk about that sermon later.
Just relating to the people.
So
relatable.
Jacob, Ashlyn.
Accessible.
How are y'all?
I'm great. Doing good. Glad to be back.
Yeah.
Did you get married while I was gone?
No.
Okay, good. Just checking.
Do we have a date?
Yes, May 14th.
All right.
Yeah.
There we go.
In Tallahassee?
Thomasville, but yeah, close.
Nice.
Sweet. All right. Well, we are excited to dive into another episode. We're actually going to be in the deep dive talking about kind of expanding on the sermon, Dean, that you preached from your stool when you were still in the throes of pneumonia, and talking about Jesus' kingdom not being of this world. And so we'll dive into that. But before we do, it is almost week one of the NFL. And so
why is Dean fist pumping at the other end of the table?
Because Tom Brady takes the field tonight.
Ashlyn's favorite time of year, NFL
live for it.
Starting. Talk about our favorite NFL football teams and how we think the year is going to go. So, Dean, you can talk about both your New England Patriots that are your life team and your rental team.
Based on annual draft order, shouldn't you go first as a Detroit Lions fan?
Yes. Started from the bottom, and we're still there.
Alex's Twitter bio says the Detroit Lions will win the Super Bowl one day.
Yeah.
One day.
I'm not sure if I'll be alive for it, but
will Twitter still be a platform then?
Doubtful.
No, but I'll have a screenshot somewhere that says, "See, I told you so." I'm like, I won't have teeth because I'll be 95.
Oh my gosh.
All right, yeah. So the Lions are still going to be bad. Like, my guess is we win 3 games. No kneecaps will be bitten, regardless of what Dan Campbell, coach of the Lions, said in one of his first press conferences.
Don't you know that knees are like
Ashlyn's
phobia?
I don't even know what that means, but I am triggered by it.
So the new head coach, because clearly, if history has taught us nothing, it's just hire a new coach every 3 years and try to rebuild again. In his first press conference, or one of his first press conferences, he said, he was trying to change the mentality of the team and the organization, and he's like, we're going to go out there and bite some kneecaps, and it was
aggressive.
I was going to say he's trying to create an aggressive mentality. Apparently, his Starbucks order in the morning is 2 large Starbucks coffees with 6 shots of espresso.
Oh my gosh.
And he chugs them before he gets to the office and somehow is still alive.
That might lead you to take out somebody's kneecaps.
Yeah.
And for our listeners, how people have different words that freak them out.
Yes.
Or just things in general.
Yeah,
the word moist or
–
fingernails on a chalkboard. Ashlyn has this thing with knees.
Yeah, but it transcends far beyond the word.
Yes, knees in general.
It's the actual existence of knees.
When you sing head, shoulders, blank, and toes, do you feel
she skips it?
She skips
I sure don't touch my kneecaps, that's for sure.
Head, shoulders, toes.
For someone who desperately depends on their knees as somebody who likes to run, I can't think about them. They gross me out to no end.
It's the best.
So you're not going to be a Lions fan.
I have to straighten my legs right now because they're kind of I can feel them.
I love it. It's so random, but it's so consistent.
No, I'm not going to be a
She is consistent
fan.
across the board,
yes,
anti-knees.
Yes. So yeah, the Lions are going to be – this is not the year. This is not the day that the Lions will win the Super Bowl. So we'll have the second pick in the draft next year.
So I definitely think Patriots are going to be better than last year. Mine is a rookie quarterback and the growing pains of that. I think they'll definitely be better. They had 7 guys opt out last year because of COVID.
They were 7-9 last year?
Yeah, but the Bills are going to win the East, but the Patriots are going to make the wild card. You heard me. You heard it here. Bucks, I'm on a rental as my second favorite team as long as Brady's there. Mm-hmm. So the Bucks are going to. It's hard to repeat in the NFL. People never repeat as champions. So that's not going to happen statistically. But the Bucs are at least going to go to the NFC Championship game.
I like it.
There you go. I, as we all know, am not invested in NFL in the fall as much as I am the PSLs, but as any good millennial would do, because due to this conversation, I've been forced to pick a team. Well, sometimes I will jokingly claim the Titans because I used to live in Nashville, but that was back in like the Eddie George era. So,
Strong reference.
Yeah. The fact that you know an era is impressive.
Some things have changed since then, we'll say. So I did what any good millennial would do, and I went online and took a quiz to tell me what my
Amazing.
favorite NFL team should be.
I love it.
Okay, so I have one question left. So we're gonna find out on this podcast what my NFL team, and maybe I'll commit. Like maybe I'll actually like own this team.
This will be the year.
Depending on the team.
Ashland's gonna come in next week like covered in gear. She,
I have like a hat and a jersey.
Went on like
and
an
a foam
NFL
finger.
shopping
Oh,
spree.
is this gonna be like a? Man, this is probably going to be like I literally have to take a survey to find out my results. I'm going to have to like sell my identity to figure out what my team is going to be. So you guys continue talking and I'll report back in a minute.
What's the next question?
Well, I'm done with the questions. Now to be able to get my results, it has told me that I
She
need to
has to
fill
like
out a
put in
survey.
her name, date of birthday, social security number, and mother's maiden name.
So when I'm not on the podcast next week because I'm trying to recover my personal identity because I just had to know what NFL team I need to support, you guys will know.
Something I'm also invested in and share with Ashlyn every week during football season is what Tom Brady wears.
Yeah.
Getting out from the parking lot, walking into the locker room.
That's true. I'm
And
very invested in that.
I anticipate the team's account. Patriots were great about it. Always did. Showing us via video what Tom is wearing when he's. I can usually tell the game's gonna go.
Yeah, you're like, he's gonna go, throw for 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick.
Or be like, oh, mink coat, ball game.
Yeah. Winning by 40.
Sunglasses inside, game is over.
He has great style and has a bit of swag. So
all right, I clicked through.
We got it?
I literally did just about have to sell my identity to get that. It says that I should be a Seattle Seahawks fan.
Hey,
So
Ty and Sarah's favorite team.
There you go.
it could be worse.
Yeah, the Seahawks should be decent. I think this year they got some pieces.
So a
and
survey that it wound up being the Seahawks. What does this tell us about you? Are you like a Northwest
Well, it
lib?
tells
Like
me-
what's going on?
It says you're loud, proud, and love talking smack.
That's awesome. They do have
That's
that
my
rowdy.
new
That's great.
identity.
Yeah,
That's
the-
so true.
the 12th man.
Pete Carroll culture and all
Yeah.
So
that.
yeah, look out! I might be biting some
Yeah.
kneecaps this
There
fall.
you go.
That's amazing.
So you and Ty and Sarah will be in Seahawks jerseys next Sunday.
Ty's entire room
and
is decorated in Seahawks.
I'm ready to go. I'm
they,
all in.
They play the Lions towards the end of the season, so we'll see. They'll definitely beat the Lions.
Do you have an NFL team, producer Jacob?
I don't know. I'm not really into the NFL, but I do like FSU football. So
If you were gonna pick an NFL team and you don't have time to take a survey, where would you go?
as a kid, I would have told you I was a Panthers fan, just because I had friends that were Panthers fans.
And you did grow up in North Carolina,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
that's
So
fitting.
I'll claim them.
Okay, cool.
Hey, that works.
I like it.
All right. Well, yeah. Enjoy the NFL. My humble but accurate opinion, it's better than college football. So enjoy it.
Know your
And,
audience, Alex. Where do you live? Mercy.
I know. It's all right. People are allowed to be wrong. The NFL's better.
Your kingdom's not of this world.
So yeah, exactly. So as we transition, Dean, why don't you recap sort of kind of what you talked about a couple weeks ago as you preached through John 18. We took a break from the whole story series as we've been walking through the Bible. You kind of shared about this idea, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's just obviously nothing new because it's biblical. Like it's just very plain in the scriptures. But I just think the church in general needs to keep returning to this idea of what it means to not be of this world. And that can only be understood if you realize that Christ's kingdom is not of this world. So that theme is there throughout Scripture, but the actual words are in John 18 when Jesus is standing before Pilate, and Pilate's trying to make sense of who Jesus is. And Jesus tells him, like, look, man, like you don't get it because my kingdom's not of this world. And my people aren't of this world. And so we have to figure out a new generation, I think, has to figure out every cycle, basically, like generational cycle of what, not just generational, like throughout their lives. Maybe every couple of decades, that same generation needs to figure out, based on what's going on in the world, what does this look like in our context to live this out? Like the truth is there, and the truth in itself stands alone that that Christ's kingdom is not of this world. But what does that look like? What are the ramifications of that for us as believers living in Tallahassee, Florida in 2021? And I just think every church across the country, really across the world, is global church, needs to continually lift that idea back up in front of people. And that's what I tried to do that day for my Trinity accessible and relatable stool that I was sitting in.
Yeah, and you had a nice table instead of a pulpit as well.
And I had to hold on to it for like 3 minutes so that I was going to pass out.
So one of the things that you talked about in that sermon is kind of for the current climate or kind of generational challenges before us right now were, you kind of mentioned power and respectability as two of the kind of things that are kind of confronting the current sort of, I guess, generation of believers. Can you help unpack those, and then we'll use that to kind of dive into some of those topics?
And I'm really interested in hearing your and Ashton's thoughts on this. So the idea of power and respectability, I think, are two current, I should say, examples of what it looks like for us to have our kingdom be not of this world, the kingdom we're a part of, the kingdom of Christ, because those are two things that have largely slipped away from Christians. Power just meaning that kind of influence, that kind of just everything that power entails. Power isn't a bad word. It's how you use power, right? So I think that the whole power idea is that really kind of relates sometimes to an older generation of Christians who came out of the moral majority era, the Christian coalition era, that kind of take back America influence through winning elections and policy in the courts and that kind of idea where it's about Christians gaining influence and power. And that was sort of like the strategy for Christians in America. That's gone. And that doesn't mean Christians shouldn't run for office and we shouldn't care, but the idea that Christians can have power, like true lasting power in this world, is just, I don't know if it ever was true, but like I think more of a facade, but now it's like clearly not true, right? The second one, that respectability, I think you see with the younger generation of believers that really want the respect of the world. You hear people say things like it's common for people to punch to the right, like on social media, like clobber the right and like kind of coddle the left. You'll see them never go after anybody on the left, even though they aren't themselves left wing. They'll never say a word about anything of the left. But the moment anyone on the right says something wrong or misspeaks, or they just are quick to just throw darts and just attack. Oftentimes they just want respectability, of a more kind of, not that right equals Christian, left equals secular, but they want oftentimes the more of a worldview that would push back against biblical teachings about some certain areas like marriage and things such as that. And they really want to be seen as respectable to the world and have the applause and be liked by the world. And that's gone too, unless you completely abandon orthodoxy. So here we are as a kingdom not of this world, and we've been craving power and respectability, and both those things are now gone. So maybe now we can actually see what it looks like to live out what Jesus said in a world that's true of. I'm curious to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
No, I think that's all like a really helpful setup and an explanation, and even kind of going off of maybe the sort of theme of power that's in this passage in John 18. What stands out to me are two things. One, that in kind of testifying to what Jesus is saying, my kingdom is not of this world, he also reveals this like deep purpose. Like Jesus knows, I mean, of course he does, as the Son, but he knows, and he says in verse 37, when he's responding to Pilate, he says, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. And everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." And so I guess what stands out to me as Jesus is actually having this exchange with Pilate is this awareness of purpose and the declaration that to be kingdom-minded in the way that Jesus is for his followers is to listen to his voice, which is the voice of truth. And so, because when one verse up, when he's saying, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world." And so in the context of, Jesus being handed over to the Jews, we know that he's going to be crucified, that he has even the way that he has instructed his followers, like to allow this to unfold, and and what he's chosen to reveal to them and not. Like, I just look at Jesus in that moment as someone who has, is the perfect image of purpose received from God, as God, and is able to boldly, enact that in time and space, and then to testify to himself that he is the truth. And so to be a part of his kingdom is to listen to the voice of truth, which is the voice of Jesus, and to follow in the way that is counter to what the culture at the time is, but has a deep eternal purpose, and to trust that over kind of the social and cultural dynamics at play. And as that passage goes on, it's so interesting to me that Jesus is submitting himself to this purpose that's going to offer salvation to man, and then Pilate is the one who comes out and he says, "I found no fault in him." But yet he still says, but the Jews have this custom where we can release one man. And so he has seen the truth, and yet he is still going to submit to the way of culture and of the world and of an earthly kingdom. And so I just see that contrasted in that passage. And so I think that just, for me personally, that gives me some things to think about as someone who wants to live as part of Jesus's kingdom, which is not of this world, to see how upside down it is, but also to see that it means more than anything listening to the voice of Jesus, and then walking in that manner, whatever that puts into play, in the world around you. So anyways, that's just kind of a random rant.
Yeah, because leading up to it, that's really helpful. Leading up to it in John 16, he says that you will have trouble in this world, but then tells them that he's overcome the world. And then in John 17, he's praying, and he says, they are not of this world. But he says, but I'm not asking you, Father, to take them out of the world. Like you said, still being in the world system there. But I'm asking you to protect them from the evil one. They are not of this world, but don't take them from the world. And that those lines are just really critical for us understanding my kingdom's not of this world. Because the call Jesus is making in that moment when he declares that is not a withdrawal, right? And it's also not to worship the world. It's a completely different kingdom. It's a different ethic altogether that we don't even have perfect language and categories for in this world.
Well, that was the thing, Dina, that I was going to think about or going to bring up, is that too often we think about power and respectability from the world's definition of those things, rather than Jesus's, and the way of this world. Like, we try to apply Jesus's kingdom to the structures of this world, and it just doesn't work. And really, that's what Israel wanted Jesus to do when he came. It was like they were looking for the king, and he was there, but he wasn't the king they envisioned, and so they couldn't really reconcile that this is the Messiah. They were looking for somebody to come with power and really to elevate them. And Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus goes, no, the way up in my kingdom is the way down. And so he's flipped the dynamic. Ashton, you said upside down kingdom. Like, he flips the dynamic from the beginning. Same thing with respectability. Like, oftentimes you have the kind of, he's going after the religious crowd, or going against the grain of the religious crowd. He's hanging out with the sinners and the tax collectors, and people are questioning, why would you be with these people who are unrespectable? Why are you? And he's like, no, these are the people that I came for. And so I think, just kind of at a base level, one of the biggest issues that we have, and Dean, you mentioned this, is we don't have a category or a way to think about this, because oftentimes we're thinking about it from the perspective of the world and trying to apply Jesus's kingdom to what we see and live in on a daily basis. Yeah,
like I said earlier, so the right and the left ideas, those are world-made categories. The power dynamic, there's exceptions to both of these, but traditionally, the power dynamic is usually to the right, and the respectability quest is usually towards the left. So when you say, hey, we don't want to be about either of those things, the quick conclusion people think is that you're asking to be a moderate. But the reality is there's nothing moderate about Jesus Christ. Nothing. So it really is a different kingdom altogether that then tries to figure out faithfully as disciples how to apply these things to the world we live in that he's not removing us from, but wants us to be faithful in.
Dean, one of the things in your sermon that you had mentioned in kind of this idea of being faithful in the world but not removed from it was this idea that kind of our call as Christians is to be faithful to Christ and to help others be, right? So like as we think about it, we don't necessarily in the world have the constructs or the categories to think about power in a worldly sense when it relates to Christ's kingdom or respectability in the same way that the world, Christ's kingdom and the world don't think about those the same way. We have a desire to be faithful to Christ, to his teaching, and to see others do that. What are some like practical implications or ways that, we can do that and we can walk with others? Ashwin, if you have thoughts on this too, like how do we take his teaching, live it out, and do it in a way that allows that vision to be realized in a world that doesn't, exist with it?
Yeah, and Ashton, I'll let hear your thoughts in a second about, I know you've been doing some work on spiritual formation and how that plays into what we're talking about. I think that could be kind of a good take that we could hear about. That just kind of popped in my head as you were saying that, the whole idea of spiritual formation when it comes to this. But for me, I just think of just close to home, like with my being a parent with Tommy, like one of the things I'm trying to help him to understand right now is that this is not going to make sense to the world, and you can't expect people to embrace Christianity. Like if the world hated Jesus, it's going to hate you. Now, that doesn't mean you act hateful. You don't want to give them reasons to based on how you treat someone, but based on simply what you believe to be true, the convictions that you claim to have about Christ that he's found on his own, through his parents and his church, guidance obviously, but he's found on his own, that this is never going to translate to popularity. And my whole point in bringing that up is I think a lot of our Christian fellowship and community discussions, we get into like actually just working through the things of the faith. Mm-hmm. We have to have conversations about coming to grips with that reality. That like maybe we were some of the first Christians, kind of the first world, the last couple centuries, where Christians have been accepted. Mm-hmm. It's not throughout history. It's only happened a few times, a few different eras, different emperors. A few different times. There has been much time where the Christians were never accepted. Mm-hmm. And we've always been a marginalized people. So maybe the fact that we had power and had respectability means that maybe we are missing some things along the way, in terms of the way of Christ. I mean, because right now, look at our different nations in this world where it's illegal to be a Christian. It could be a death sentence to be a Christian, closed to missionaries coming in, all those type of things. Like, they're not concerned with power in that moment, those believers. They're not trying to grab a sword. They're trying to grab a cross. And that idea of the cross versus the sword is really important for us to continue to come to grips with. Because, again, in our American understanding, when we think of a cross, we know that, like, oh, Jesus died on the cross. Mm-hmm. But it's a symbol. We think it's real, but, like, it's more a symbol. It's a necklace. It's a design. It goes on your mantle. It's a painting. It's a tattoo. Those type of ideas. Where for the first century Christians, it just meant one thing, and that was death. Mm-hmm. Like Jesus wasn't the only person that died on a cross. And the two next to him were not the only others. This was not a unique kind of way of death penalty. Mm-hmm. It was a common practice to carry out crucifixion. So when you hear cross or see someone die on a cross in these times, it meant a convicted criminal, right? In Deuteronomy, cursed is the one, mm-hmm. Who hangs on a tree. So that's just so foreign to how we think about cross. So we just have to force our minds to return back to that, like what the cross really meant and really symbolized. It was anything but power. It was anything but respectability. And it's the way that we are to understand Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Philippians 2, that he humbled himself. Yeah, and then it tells us exactly what that looked like. It's worth a read for every Christian, Philippians mm-hmm. 2. But that's what kind of comes to mind. It's helping us come to grips with that in our discipleship and just normal conversations about faith.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. Ashwin, as you think about what Dean just said and that idea of spiritual formation, kind of helping others abandon, the definitions of the world in these things and thinking about the way that they're defined in Christ's kingdom, what are some of those thoughts that come to mind?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'll have to think about that more and report
there,
back
yeah.
later. But I mean, just off the top of my head, even as Dean was talking, I do think that that reality of having to live cruciform is essential to, living in a kingdom that is not of this world, and to following Jesus as the King. And so, that's when I look at his followers and just the way that he conducted his life and his ministry in the Gospels, that Jesus is our example, of course, of living cruciform. And it doesn't mean that you don't stand up for injustice, or that you don't that you never get riled up about anything, or anything like that. It doesn't mean that you are reclusive, or you just sort of lay down and let the world wash over you. It just means that you are a citizen of another kingdom. And so, but part of that identity is living cruciform. And so I think today, we like categories because they help us kind of make sense and define things and let us know where we stand. And yet that more often than not leads us to then want to, kind of put down our dividing lines and say what I'm for and what I'm against, and those kinds of things. And as opposed to, you can disagree with, the way that people who are citizens of an earthly kingdom are living, but you are also called as a Christ follower to consider others more important than yourselves, and so just thinking about like, what does it actually mean practically in the day-to-day to live cruciform, but and to see the world in a totally different, vision. But in order to be able to do that, we have to be formed, and we are being formed into Christ likeness. Everyone is made in the image of God, but we're growing kind of in the likeness of that image, further and further into holiness and perfection. And so all that to say, I think it all comes down to, what we were talking about again in John 18, but what we can also see in John 17 as Jesus is praying with the Father is just communion with God. We have to be able to grow in this vision of the kingdom that we are bound for, and that we are a part of in Christ. We have to then get to know, the voice of Jesus, and we have to know the purposes that he came for, and that that he calls us into. And so, I want to think, that's a great question. I want to think about that more, but I do think that the way that maybe spiritual formation connects to this kind of idea of living in a kingdom that is not of this world is that we have to know whose kingdom it is, and that we're called to know that person, and that is Christ. Even I'm reading through Hebrews right now, just in my own personal reading time, and I've sat in chapter 1 for like ever, because it's just every line, that Christ is the heir of all things, and he has ushered in this kingdom that we get to be a part of, but it's so unlike the world. And so I think there's an idea. This is kind of like on I feel like on Christian Twitter or whatever, I see this topic coming up more now, but this idea of a Christian imagination, that we have to be able to envision or imagine. And I don't mean like concoct in your head, but like expand your mind to be able to sort of seek this vision of what the kingdom of God actually is, as much as we can understand it in the here and now. And so, we also can't think about living as citizens of another kingdom in terms of, an earthly kingdom. And so we have to, that would be another thing that connects to spiritual formation. We have to pray and ask for the Lord to help us understand the kingdom, that as we read the scriptures and as we pray and we grow in communion with God through prayer, that he would actually be giving us a clearer vision of what it is to live in his kingdom, and not in an earthly one. And so there's things that, the psalmist says, like, your ways are too high for me. Like, this knowledge is so great that I can't attain it. And so I think there's also a sense of to figure out how to live in the kingdom that's not of this world, in Christ's kingdom. There are ways that, we can't just like mentally get there on our own, so prayer is essential. Reading the scripture is essential. Like, this is how we are not only formed to be made to belong in that kingdom, and to thrive in it and to live as people who truly are, images of it. But it also is how we come to know the Lord, that we'll be spending, all of our time worshiping. And so I don't know, I'm truly just talking as I think, but those are things that come to mind. And so, yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that spiritual formation connects to and is for the kingdom of God. And then hopefully, my hope for myself is that, as I'm being transformed, as an image bearer of God, but further into the likeness of Christ, that I would start to look more and more like a citizen of Christ's kingdom. And that means that I'm going to start to look weird, progressively over time to the world. I probably already do. You can tweet at us and tell us all the ways that I am already weird. I'm aware of them, but that we're going to look different. We know, like, when we travel around the world, you can tell, like, if I go to Germany, I can tell who is probably a German citizen and who is not. Now, not always, because of the way that the world now is so connected. There could be someone from, Asia who grew up in Germany. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying by like ethnic identity. I'm just saying, but that person would fit in and blend in, and and they might have roots elsewhere. So, anyways, I feel like I have to make all the disclaimers now. But that we would be recognizable as members of the kingdom of God, but also know that people who are part of the earthly kingdom, who have no interest or no vision for Christ's kingdom, might not always recognize it. And so that's why it's going to look weird to them, because they don't even know that another kingdom, the real kingdom, is what's there. So that was way longer than you thought, because I literally was just thinking as I was talking. But great. Those are some words.
No, I really want to hear your thoughts on that from that angle. That was really helpful. Two things came to mind as you were talking when you talked about the vision, like a different vision for what the kingdom is in this world. What came to my mind was Romans 12:2. Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So your mind's different. That vision, comes from our minds. Obviously, it's not sight. When we talk about vision, we're talking about sight, right? Like literal vision. We're talking about a vision that comes from inside, that gets cast out. Figurative. And then when we talked about prayer, I was like, oh yeah, that's true, because Jesus himself, when he taught us how to pray, said, "Thy kingdom come." Right, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. So he said, I was like, oh wow, yeah, it actually is a big component of this conversation, is praying for that to be true. Jesus himself prescribed that for us, for what to pray. So that was really helpful.
And I think one of the other things, Ashlyn, that you mentioned that it is, and this is way easier maybe to say than to do, but you mentioned that especially in today's context, like the identifiers and the labels that we kind of put on ourselves or others put on us have become in some ways primary to our identity. And I think especially in like cultural Christianity, it like Christian is just another one of those identifiers, and it rarely or it can be a challenge to be the primary before I am anything else. I am a child of God. I belong to a different king and a different kingdom. And so I that was just something that, as you were saying, that I was like, that is a helpful maybe shift as we're praying and as we're, kind of renewing our mind, that we would be reminded, that we would pray, Lord, like, make me aware of the fact that I'm a part of your kingdom before I'm a part of any other kingdom, before I'm anything, before I'm any other, label or identity kind of moniker. That was just helpful.
Yeah.
Dean, one of the things you mentioned in your sermon, I think you said you created a word, everydayness.
Everydayness.
And so really, like, because this came out of the idea that that our job as Christians and belonging to Christ's kingdom isn't to change the world. We're not to be world beater, changer people, but what is everydayness?
Yeah, well, I should have mentioned Owen Wilson from You, Me, and Dupree talking about finding your nests. Going back, I wish I would have done that, because that really is what it looks like for a Christian. That needs to be a book, my next book, finding your everyday nest. And I think that it's important for us really to find our everydayness. And by that, I mean like how we go about being a part of Christ's kingdom and fulfilling the Great Commission where he's placed us. Because reality is hardly anyone is going to change the world. And even people who have been really like majorly influential, like a Billy Graham, he didn't change the world. He changed a lot. God used him to bring the good, changing news of Christ to a lot of people, but not the whole world. And so it's just we can name the people that have those kind of platforms. That's how few there are. Most of us are just going to live normal lives. Yeah. right? Now, it might happen in different contexts, different places, but I think we have to figure out. I would even say this to our missionaries overseas, to still. I think here on the state side of things, we think those are like the super level varsity Christians. And I actually do think that, but because I have that much admiration and respect.
Sure.
But you know what they're doing where they are? They're living the everydayness in those neighborhoods and in those countries, and so they're just being faithful where God has placed them in their neighborhoods, planting churches, meeting people, building relationships, and that's the faith is really all about. So I think that sometimes we think that it has to be massive or of notoriety to make an impact. When really I want people to figure out is how to be faithful in the everydayness of life, just like work, family, neighborhood, friends, whatever hobbies, social groups, whatever it might be, to just figure out how to be faithful there to the Great Commission and also to helping others follow Christ.
And really, I mean, that sort of is the way that, at least currently, until Christ returns, the way His kingdom is built, the way in a sense, the world is changed, is by people embracing that calling to be faithful where they are.
Yeah, I think it was John MacArthur who wrote years ago, a couple decades ago, a book on the 12 disciples, and I think it was titled 12 Ordinary Men.
Yeah.
That he used.
So this is something that is interesting to me because I'm going to tap into my nerdy English major side for a second. In one of my literature classes, we spent a good amount of time talking about the fancy version of this term, or of this everydayness, which is the quotidian would be the fancy word for it. And it's interesting to me to now think about Christians and how and Dean, you've spent a lot of time kind of trying to encourage our church and those who sort of follow you, that exactly what you're just saying, that the goal of our lives shouldn't be to have this huge platform or to feel like we have to save the world or change the world or whatever. That I won't regurgitate everything you guys just said, but it's interesting to me because as Christians, I mean, I think our culture at large, I mean, especially the three of us who kind of grew up in the 90s and 2000s, that was a huge message that you received, and I mean, you've talked plenty about that, that go out and be a world changer. That as we've internalized this, so it's not just Christians, but speaking specifically to Christians, that now navigating life and trying to figure out what it looks like to be faithful there. All this to say, I'm thinking about how there are so many people throughout history, cultural movements have been based on, at least I'm thinking from a literary perspective, on not just analyzing or observing the everyday, but trying to show the beauty in it. And so it's just interesting to me that I wonder if, in a way, as Christians, if we are more connected to, to poetry and to writing and to maybe even art that explores that, to some of these different outlets that show us that the everyday is actually, there's a lot of beauty and meaning and purpose there, that could actually help cultivate that more in us, because we are trying to live these faithful lives as citizens of God's kingdom. But in our, in our earthly journey, there is a lot of boring, mundane, there's just the everyday stuff of life, but it also is where the Lord has ordained for us to be sanctified and for us to, steward well and to live and grow as citizens of His kingdom. And kind of even going back to what I was talking about with, if we don't really have a grand vision for that, it doesn't sound very compelling to us. If anything, it sounds like maybe just try to be more content, or something like that. So anyways, I was just thinking about that as a Christian, I think it's important for me to be reminded, and a great way to do that is through art, that there actually is, the Lord is in and has ordained the everyday. I mean, you could get into, to work, to whatever your responsibilities are, to housekeeping, to, to cooking, to running your errands, whatever it is. So all of that to say, it's just interesting that I think all our default is what you guys are saying, to be, unsatisfied with the everyday, when we need to sort of recover this great vision for how important the everyday is in our lives. But also that we should be looking to, many others who have already kind of grasped this reality, or at least have found it interesting enough to explore. And so, I I don't know. I was just thinking about that as you were talking, because now I'm starting to think back to, some of these conversations that we had, when I was in college, and I hadn't really ever thought about that before, that it's not just like the grand stories, but sometimes the grand stories or the moments of beauty are found in the little things of life. And so I think if we can have an interest in that, then that can even help to kind of cultivate this sense of meaning and purpose in the everyday, and help us to understand that the Lord does use it for his glory. And I think we see that played out in the scriptures as well. Like when we see Jesus calling the disciples, or when we see, some of the most intimate moments with Christ and with those who follow him, are these like really, it's almost kind of like you just zoom in, really far into like a moment in time. But they're not always these grand epic experiences. It's, he happens to be eating in someone's home, or, walking along the road, or whatever it is.
Well, I think that's really well said. And oftentimes the accumulation of the mundane is in some ways what impacts the world in the most meaningful ways. And so like if you think about somebody like Adoniram Judson, like who has lived in a ordinary, mundane, in air quotes kind of life. I mean, it wasn't ordinary or mundane, but has gone on. Like he was just being faithful in, where the Lord had him. And he's now, how many people since has he encouraged to love, to see the mission of God go forward? And it was just because he was being faithful where he was, and in his everydayness. And I think that doesn't mean that the Lord's going to use everybody in that way. But oftentimes that there can be cumulative effects of just being faithful where you are, where the Lord has you, in the things that you're doing. And it might not seem like right now the impact is world changing, but you're changing lives and eternities and building God's kingdom.
Yeah, and I think that, back to what Ashlyn said, embracing some of those the writings, literature that points us to kind of the glories of the basic things of life. I just picked up a book about homesickness that I'm about to start reading. The guy's homesick for his home in Kentucky. And it's just to be really great, just thinking about home and neighborhood and place and house. And I just got a Bill Bryson, of all people, book that's he usually is about travel books and the woods and all that kind of stuff. And it's a book about his home. So I'm just starting to so that kind of stuff. I think it's just get our hands on things that almost give a different messaging than what we see on social media. That has been around for a long time. And I think is really helpful and beneficial to a world that only glorifies the big and the impressive and the flashy. And
so to maybe flip that a little bit, for people who find themselves in the big, the powerful, the flashy, and that's relative, right? Like that's, but they are Christians and they are trying to be faithful stewards there. How do you steward worldly power, respectability, for advancing God's kingdom?
I would pick up Andy Crouch's book on power. I think it would be very helpful. Andy Crouch. I think I forget the name of it, but
Strong and Weak.
Strong and Weak. I would read. I think it's very helpful if you're in that tension right now to read that book. Andy's fantastic. But I think you first have to agree with Jesus in John 18 that you're part of a kingdom that's not of this world. But again, you live here. John 17. Don't take them out of this world. So I think you have to make sure that your convictions are never compromised. I think that really is what it comes down to. And part of those convictions should be a way of a cross, right? So I think that's what's really critical. What am I living for? Ashley mentioned earlier, part of spiritual formation is actually knowing Christ. You have to know the one you're being formed into. I think more of that. But I think the biggest one is, do I make sure I'm doing 1st and 2nd Corinthians this week. And in 2 Corinthians 13, Paul closes out the letter and says, examine yourselves to see if you're in the faith. And I think it needs to be a daily discipline and practice for Christians to examine themselves and see if they're in the faith. Yeah.
Well said.
I mean, how often do we weigh ourselves every 2 days, or whatever it might be? We keep more track of that, than we do our own spiritual lives. We should be examining ourselves to see if we're in the faith. Regularly.
It's good. Any closing thoughts before we transition?
No. I think I've said.
I
think I spoke twice and said more than either of you.
I almost said the dumbest thing ever, and it was dumb enough. I just need to share it. After Ashlyn we talked about spiritual formation, I was really good, and I just wasn't thinking. And I was like, "Gosh, that was really good. I wish I wish we would have recorded that. It's like you hear people say like, I wish we had that on tape.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second, we
We
are
do.
recording this.
man.
I'll blame pneumonia.
The microphones are for show. Yeah, they're just for show. Is your oxygen levels low? All right. Well, hopefully that served you well. I would encourage you, if you hadn't, or if you need a refresher as well, to listen to Dean's sermon from a couple weeks ago that helped prime this conversation. And just as you continue to live faithfully in a kingdom that is different than the world, may this be an encouragement to you. And as we transition to the local on tap, we are kicking off fall in Tallahassee, even though it doesn't feel like it. Still feels like summer, but Labor Day has come and gone. Dean's White Sperry's are laid to rest for approximately 6 months.
I'll wear them to lunch after Easter at the Civic Center.
There we go. So what are your favorite fall traditions here in Tallahassee?
I mean, for us, Friday night out at the games, we're every Friday night this week. Gosh, I was at the field Wednesday night. I was at Leon volleyball Tuesday night. Our family. We were at Leon JV game last night. Thursday night, Holy Comforter McClay football game, which I coach, and then Friday will be whatever local games in town going on. So that's it. That's just such a big part of just all things going on with Leon and the high school and all that brings to now having a kid who's a student there adds extra fun to it. So that's definitely it for me. Just all
you're now a Leon legacy family,
which is awesome, And so, but like the routine is real simple for us in the fall. Like I don't know how it just kind of became this. It's like Friday go to a game, Saturday wake up, game day. You usually maybe go to Kush's, watch football, or just watch football, hang out, get pumped for Sunday morning church, and then go watch the Patriots somewhere. And Tyler has to go to somewhere to watch the Seahawks and. Like at Buffalo Wild Wings or whatever. And so, all things football for me, but mainly locally doing Friday night lights. Leon games is the best for us.
Nice. Ashley?
Well, the Greenways are about to get great.
You and Rainey and those Greenways.
Had to show some love to the Greenways.
Are you a fan? I'm not sure.
I know, right? I think that's like the most contribution I've had to this podcast is just like beating the drum of the Tallahassee Greenways. No, I really do love, fall just, the city has like a little more energy. And as it slowly gets cooler, I like just kind of being outside whenever and wherever I can. So I will be out at the trails, dog park, all that stuff. I also have just gotten on the Frother's Daughter train, the new coffee truck in town. And she travels around and has like her little coffee trailer, but they do like monthly specials. And the September ones are like on point. It makes me wish that it was like 50 degrees outside, but they're all like, pumpkin, brown sugar, whatever, all the apple, all the kind of fall.
Yeah, apple's like the new coffee drink.
Yeah,
like
it
everywhere.
Really, it kind of is. Apple is having a moment, I guess we could say.
We're like
look
less
out,
than
PSLs.
2 months from me eating outside
there you go.
at lunch.
There you
My
go.
threshold.
We're probably about 20 degrees away from me just like eating soup all the time. That's another fall tradition for me. I'm like big on the soups.
Nice. I'm pro soup.
It's still a little too hot, but I'm waiting for that to come.
I eat outside. I'm when we rephrase that, I'm willing to eat outside November 1st through April 1st for our listeners or whatever I was talking about. That's known as the threshold.
Unless there's like a random heat wave or something.
Oh, inside.
Yeah. This is so stupid, but it's one of my favorite fall traditions. Is the lines are really bad. So like as we covered before, so if they lose, I wear black on Monday. It's like my little funeral for my football team.
Oh my
and it's just like it's or if they win, I wear blue because so it's just the way that I celebrate.
I'm gonna be paying attention.
That's great.
It's the way I celebrate. Well, really not. There's little celebration going on.
So I know in general you like the NFL across the board more than college.
Yes.
But do you like the Lions more than you like University of Michigan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no question. So that's just like one little personal thing. Like that's your equivalent of soup.
I like it.
And then like I think our family thing, that one of the things we do is like just the festivals. So we go eat our annual gyro at the Greek Food Festival
yes.
in
You're
October.
on the Greek food
And
festival. Oh my gosh.
and then like Bradley Country Days.
I bet Pat Scott, your mom, is into all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, my mom's
she's
like
very
just into-
festival. She's like on tour in Tallahassee regularly.
Yeah,
I appreciate that about her.
She's like if you need ideas of things to do in and around the Tallahassee area, Pat Scott's Facebook, you can probably plan.
I like her everydayness. of life that she lives.
Yeah. So like usually, I mean, I've lived here 3 times as long as her, and she's been to 3 times as many places. But that's what I guess retirement life is like. I don't know. So that would be something that I'm sure we'll be looking forward to this fall. Jacob, any fall traditions?
Ashlyn took mine. I'm a Greenway fan as well,
Thank
but
you.
during the summer it's kind of unbearable. So I'm looking forward to that. And then my family also does like a pumpkin carving contest every year, so
Nice.
that'll be fun. I'm gonna try to.
I feel like you have an advantage as an architect.
Yeah, I bet your
it's
pumpkins
kinda
are
cheating.
really
Yeah.
artistic.
An X-Acto knife and I have been around the block a couple times.
Although your brother's in construction, so
That's true.
Also,
Yeah.
Halloween's on a Sunday this year.
it is.
Randomly.
It is.
So where do you guys dressing up as?
Ooh.
Dean in the pulpit.
I don't think I've dressed up since 2nd grade. I'm not sure. I was Curious George once when I was a kid. My mom sewed the costume, like handmade the entire
Wow.
costume.
It's
Pretty
impressive.
Cool. Yeah.
Pre-Pinterest, even more impressive.
Interest.
Well, on that note,
and
no.
y'all tune those Deckham festivals. Oh my gosh.
Hey, we're
Listen, you gotta embrace
we're
it.
embracing
Go
the
to Little Athens on Tennessee Street.
we're
You can go
embracing the
365 days a
everydayness
year.
of our city.
I am for the nations at the Greek Food Festival. Even though the spanakopita probably came from the Publix freezer, I'm still about it.
Amazing. I love it.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed this. Enjoy Tallahassee life in the fall, and we'll see you next week. Hopefully all 4 of us, if we can stay healthy, for another episode of The Local Dive. Take care.
Thanks for listening to The Local Dive, a podcast diving into deep and shallow musings about Christ, the church, and culture. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow The Local Dive on social media and continue the conversation with us on Instagram and Twitter at The Local Dive Pod.